Hello and welcome to Newspeak, our weekly look at the news agenda. Very pleased to introduce, as usual, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our senior fellow and royal historian, and Amy Gallagher of Stand Up to Woke. Unfortunately, Philip Kisley, Dr. Philip Kisley, I always add Dr. Philip Kisley, is not very well. So he's not with us this week, but you have to make do with us. I'm sure it'll be just as scintillating. Before we talk about what's been happening this week, Rafe, we've got yet more locals to just tell people about. I think some particularly good meetings coming up, right?
Yes, some exciting events happening across the country as part of our NCF local scheme. Many of you know what these are. These are informal gatherings of NCF locals, supporters. It's completely free of charge, all of our events, and they provide a chance to hear, often from a great guest speaker, as well as meet like-minded kindred spirits, where you can essentially have a conversation and a chat in a way that perhaps you can't do elsewhere in your life. So do take a note of these following dates. On Sunday, the 6th of October, we'll be in Nottingham, where there'll be an event with Lois Perry, former leader of UKIP and founder of the Climate Common Sense Group, also well known for being on Talk TV. That's Sunday, October the 6th in Nottingham with Lois Perry. On Monday, the 7th of October, here in London, we'll have Peter Blexley, who is a former Scotland Yard detective many of you will be familiar with. Monday, October the 7th in London, he'll be speaking. Then on Tuesday, October the 8th, we'll have Carl Benjamin of Lotus Eaters in Bath. So if you live in or around Bath, Carl Benjamin on the 8th of October. And then finally, on the 13th of October in Birmingham, there'll be an NCF locals visit to Staffordshire Regiment Museum in Lichfield, which sounds rather fun. So that's in Birmingham on October the 13th. So if you're in Nottingham, London, Bath or Birmingham and want to go to any of those events, just email locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. That's locals@newcultureforum.org.uk.
It's a great lineup of stuff, isn't it, actually? This is great. And people are, it has to be said again, people are actually just organising this off their own bat. Their own volition.
Our thanks go to all those volunteers who do this. As Peter said, completely free of charge. They're so committed to this and it's yielding great results there. So do come along and join. The more the merrier.
Great. Well, from something positive to something sort of negative, Amy, Labour have been having quite rightly a tough time of it this week, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're only a few months into the Labour government. And it's been the worst kind of initial months, I think, of any government that we've ever seen for a long time. It's been quite shocking just how bad it's been. Approval ratings for Keir Starmer are now, he's now gone down 45 points in approval ratings. He's now more unpopular than Rishi Sunak was towards the end of the Tory government. And approval ratings for the Labour Party in general are just very, very low. Of course, the kind of initial thing was kind of labelling everyone as far-right thugs, and then we've had the winter fuel allowance, and now this recent week we've seen the expenses scandal. So I think a lot of people are just feeling that they're more Tory than Tories, really. He promised change, that was the thing that they've led on, and actually we've seen that they're no different. In fact, they seem to be worse than the Tories. So we've seen that in for example, with Keir Starmer, we've seen him accept £16,000 worth of donations for clothes for his wife, £20,000 in donations for accommodation for his son to study in a quiet space, over £70,000 worth of just general freebies. And this is across the Labour government as well. Bridget Phillipson, for example, accepted free Taylor Swift tickets. A few other MPs have done the same. And they seem to be very defensive about it. They don't really seem to understand why this is such an issue, which, as many people are pointing out, if this had been the Tory government, they'd be up in arms about it. But at the moment, they just seem to, their kind of response is, well, I declared it. So, I said that I was doing it, which means it's okay. Which they don't really seem to understand that it's the hypocrisy of the whole thing, particularly given they're a left-wing Labour government that's supposed to be, people care about the working class, and actually they are quite happy to use their privilege to get into things for free. But I think people have been shocked by the scandals themselves, but as I said, how they're handling it. I mean, Keir Starmer seems to just get worse and worse in interviews. He's very defensive. He's very unlikable. He doesn't seem to care about wanting to connect to the public or meet the public where they're at. He almost seems to be quite contemptuous of the fact that he even has to have a relationship with the public, I feel. He just doesn't seem to understand what it is to be a leader. He doesn't seem to understand the importance of persuasion or of kind of showing some kind of understanding. He's just annoyed that he's being asked questions, really. Yeah. And this seems to be the case across Labour. They don't really seem to be understanding why what they're doing is making them so unpopular. But there hasn't been any change, and it's just very much, I would say, even worse than the Tories.
Yeah, it's with this clothes thing.
Yeah,
it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I would have thought, if sort of pride alone, wouldn't you instinctively think, actually, it might not be a good idea if I accept money for clothes? You know, you wouldn't do it, would you? But also just out of sheer pride, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, just the whole level of naivety there. I mean, the idea that, Keir Starmer needs to have a sugar daddy, not only a sugar daddy, but then his sugar daddy's buying clothes for his wife, so he's a cuck as well as everything else. I mean, that's what we have here. And of course, he's not the only one doing it. But but the excuses that were being given, for example, Gordon Brown's wife, David Cameron's wife, they all rented their dresses. Lady Starmer isn't the first person to have come into office and needed to, fashion and so forth. There are ways that this has been done. And I think it's just the level of incredulity by Starmer and others that they can't believe that anybody would dare question him, because, the level in which they've been so sanctimonious and so righteous for years that they would never in a million years think that they could ever possibly do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And how dare you question me, because, of course, I'm whiter than white. But it is the hypocrisy, because, people who went hammer and tongs against Boris Johnson over the cost of wallpaper are the same people who are now trying to justify. And you even had, the disgraceful scene of James O'Brien, that other sanctimonious prig on LBC, basically justifying Keir Starmer's expenses in a way he would never have given any leeway or made any accommodation towards Boris Johnson had he been in the same way. And it's just, I think, to see the leftist commentators who have been so quick to judge others, turn cartwheels and try to make the most convoluted explanation as to why this is somehow different has been a sight to behold. I mean, we on this channel, at least, we have been equally hard on the Tories as we have been on Labour, and I think we could say that we are impartial on those sorts of things. And yet to see such blatant partisanship here really sticks in the craw. And of course, it goes down to, it just further erodes trust in politics when you think even those people who hold themselves up high are guilty of just the same sort of thing.
But the thing about this, surely, so what it also is interesting is it shows a kind of cultural shift in the sense that for a long time, at least when I was growing up, how the Prime Minister's wife dressed wasn't even a thing. We didn't even really know. Does anyone remember Audrey Callaghan, for example? Or Mary Wilson? They were kind of, not exactly like Soviet wives, but they were just ordinary women. But this idea that you have to put on a show, it's like the new elite, isn't it?
It is the new elite. And she's not, we haven't really seen much of her, his wife, Victoria. We haven't really, I don't think the public have gotten to know her very much. And yet she needs to have expensive designer dresses. I don't know why. You can buy perfectly nice dresses from the high street. And the idea that she has to have it bought for her. It's the same with Angela Rayner and other people, that they feel the need that because they're politicians, they need to have very expensive clothes all the time. Well, most of us do very kind of professional jobs and wear kind of ordinary clothes, and it looks fine. So it's just this, like, the entitlement of it all, that, we are in this position, therefore we should go to Wimbledon, therefore we should go to Taylor Swift or have a designer dress on. You just think, well, why? Why does,
It's a usurping of power because, of course, this all began under Blair. This is the presidentializing of the prime ministerial office, because we don't have an office of First Lady. Our First Lady was Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Our new First Lady is Queen Camilla. And there's this attempt now to try to cast the Prime Minister of this country as if he was head of state, like the President of America. You even had David Lammy saying, falsely saying, one of many false statements that he comes out with, that, the President has an allowance for clothes and so forth, therefore the Prime Minister should. Well, actually, he doesn't have an allowance, but anyway, he is the head of state. This is not the head of state that we're talking about. So, yeah, it's absolutely right. But also, we find out also that Angela Rayner has paid taxpayers are paying £68,000 for her to have a vanity photographer to accompany her around. I mean, I'd rather she spent that money on her own new wardrobe, given how ghastly her clothes are.
Well,
but,
that green outfit, yeah. Yeah.
And, again, Liz Truss did the same thing, though. Liz Truss went everywhere with her own personal photographer, dressing up as Margaret Thatcher in tanks and so forth. This is clearly Angela Rayner on manoeuvres, perhaps, to replace Starmer and trying to rebrand her image. But the fact that all of these expenses are somehow being justified. And, if you're the leader of the Labour Party, you don't need a Savile Row suit, which costs you £15,000 or so. If you're a man of the people, you should be going to Burton's or wherever to get your suits from there. It shows you how out of touch this Islington set is, who really are so disconnected from the red wall that they claim that they want to represent.
Yes. Also, I mean, alongside that, his two-tier new gear, Keir.
Yes.
But also there's this no beer thing. No beer, actually, for that matter, no smoking.
Yeah, so there was the idea of banning smoking in pub gardens, and now he's going to phase out smoking completely in the way that the Tories were. I think there's going to be a few tweaks to the plan.
What does that mean, by the way, Amy, practically speaking? Where will it be phased out?
It's like by age, in the same way that the Tories were going to do it. Right. I don't quite know what the exact age, but there's going to be a cut-off point for smoking. And now recently he's announced he wants to change licensing laws for pubs, basically to restrict the amount of alcohol that people have, and for pubs to close earlier. So just to kind of to overall reduce people's alcohol consumption and ability to have fun. Really, it seems so petty and so just anti-fun and anti-freedom. You think these aren't policies, into a new kind of government, the first couple of months or several months of a government, these aren't policies that really fire you up and get you excited, are they? I mean, who's going to think, oh, yes, that's good, they're going to change the licensing laws so we can drink less. It really just shows you that, this is something we knew before they were in government, but he just doesn't have any kind of vision. He's very technocratic, very managerial, and he looks at these things. He probably sees it as a very good idea, but there's no kind of, as I said again, connection with the public that would be the right time to announce something like that now, and in the early days of a government, and that it's something that you would really get behind, because it's not.
Well, it's perfectly in keeping, though, with the ideology of New Labour. Let's call this out for what it is. This is the new Puritanism, right? And this just perfectly fits in with that authoritarian streak that we've seen, the most authoritarian government, I would say, of our lifetimes that we've seen. Keir Starmer is not a politician. This man is a chief prosecutor, just as you had during the Puritan era when you had the, hanging Judge Jeffreys and these characters going around, completely humorless, completely full of self-importance, and doing their very best to essentially enforce their own strict moral codes on the rest of us. And I'm afraid, the parallels are so clear for us to see what's going on here, and along with the hypocrisy here too. And, for heaven's sake, our bars and pubs suffered hugely from the smoking ban, then hit with the whole, COVID and the lockdowns and so forth. The last thing they need is a further restriction. And also we have demographic change where, of course, fewer young people are drinking alcohol at all for various reasons. I mean, life's hard enough without this added burden.
Do you think there's anything in this sort of, because these are basically traditional working class pastimes?
Yeah.
Aren't they? And it's like almost that they're going for those, remember during COVID, as you just said, there was this thing with the pubs that essentially pubs are off limits, and then I think at least one council was actually going to try and ban people from standing outside pubs, which has become a thing. I think in the past 20 years since the original smoking ban, people standing outside en masse, even in cold weather, has become a kind of feature of pubs. But anyway, it just seems to be that it's these things that they go for.
And we've seen recently, there's a story that's come out that in December of 2021, when we're all going into lockdown, Keir Starmer gave a speech about encouraging people to stay at home and stay locked down from the penthouse of the Labour donor, Lord Alley, when he should have been at home himself. So you see that these rules that they love, these authoritarian rules, they don't even abide by them themselves. They see that it's for the common people, that the people that need to be told how to behave. But they as the kind of elite class, it doesn't apply to them because, of course, they're smarter. They know, they know what to do. But it is just this. It is just this hatred of the working class that you need to be told what to do. We don't need to be told what to do. You need to manage. We need to tell you what amount of alcohol you should have, or how much you should smoke, when you should stay indoors or not go outside. And they are just so. It's unbelievable that this is a Labour government that was, the party of the working class, that now, so much of what they've done since being in government, from calling everyone thugs to restricting, poor pensioners' winter fuel allowance, it is like an absolute war on the working class. It's remarkable.
Actually, yes. When you actually list it like that, it really, a Tory government wouldn't try to get away with that, would they?
No. And they said he doesn't want to put any more money into the NHS and everything. It seems like an attack on the working class. And you say, if it was a Tory government, this would be, the nasty party, they hate the poor. And yet Labour seem to be able to get away with it.
Do you know, another thing that's come up as a criticism is that they're just not very good politicians. Have you heard that? They're just not really very able.
Well, yeah, that didn't. No surprise. That's the least surprising fact of the year. Yeah. I mean, the Tories were a rum lot as well. And I found the Tory cabinet depressing. But I only had to look over across to the opposition benches when Rishi Sunak was doing PMQs to see what an even more substandard bunch they are. I mean, for heaven's sake, a good quarter or so of the backbench have difficulty speaking English correctly. There's so many people there who are recent immigrants, and obviously they're there because they can bring over a demographic in their constituency. But when they stand up to ask questions, you literally have trouble understanding what they're saying. There is a huge, dearth of talent on both sides of Parliament, and of course, one of the reasons they do have these expenses scandals is because I personally think that we don't pay our MPs enough, and that's why they get into this sort of a trouble. And why would you want to go into politics? How do you attract the very best of Britain, the brightest minds, to come into politics? Because they could earn far more than that in the private sector. The media are going to go through their private lives with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, there's just no incentive. And also the public now despise all politicians now. There's no deference whatsoever. So you just think, why would you want to go into politics if you were a bright young thing? So as a result of that, we get people who are essentially the flotsam and the jetsam. Yeah.
Also, I mean, you wouldn't, if you were going to go into it, I think, isn't it right that Nigel Farage doesn't take any expenses or something like that? I mean, because basically you're going to be open to all sorts of criticism. I mean, if someone sort of offered you money, if you became an MP and said, I'll kit you out in, Jean-Paul Gaultier or whatever, it'd be probably a bit infradig now, but you wouldn't do it, would you?
No, because you're in the public.
Yeah,
it's a public thing. You're playing a public role, so you need to act a certain way.
Well, Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, I mean, he famously insisted that, cabinet ministers and members of parliament there get very high salaries precisely so that they couldn't be lent on and couldn't get involved in these sorts of corruption scandals and so forth.
And another thing to say about Nigel Farage is he's a very, very good public speaker, and he often speaks without an auto cue. And we're seeing that Keir Starmer is not a very good public speaker. At the conference, he relies heavily on auto cues. He made that terrible gaffe where he said, release the sausages, instead of release the hostage. I know, it's so bad. It's like you said. I think you said it was like something like Biden. You'd expect from Biden. It's such. What he was saying was such an important message about the Israeli conflict, and you almost think, is he even connected to what he's saying? With Farage, you feel like every word it's coming from his soul, or he says it, as though he means it. Whereas Keir Starmer seems to be so disconnected from what he said. It's almost as though it's just a job, and he's just reading the lines. And you saw it as well when during question time in Parliament, when he kept calling Rishi Sunak the Prime Minister rather than calling him the leader of the opposition. It's not even sunk in that he's the Prime Minister. So he doesn't even view himself. I don't think he even sees himself as inhabiting that role, because he's just in this managerial role that he sees. He doesn't see any difference between Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. He just sees it as a job. And that is very worrying. That's the last thing you want from a leader.
It's all the more remarkable given that he's a barrister, and barristers are supposed to be very quick on their feet. So you begin to wonder how he was actually in a court situation where, of course, you got to speak on your thing. But it's also some of the language he uses. You know, for example, during this whole issue about taking his son to the football matches and his son being given £20,000 worth of accommodation to study for his GCSEs, he constantly says, "My boy." It's my boy, not once has he ever referred to my son. He just, my boy and I want to go. I want to do it for my boy. And it just seems so affected and so clearly done for a deliberate reason. Yes. And that's what it's the lack of authenticity.
Yes, exactly. I think that the sausages slip, is quite telling. It's not just a question of mistake, because you're quite right. We've all been in that situation, haven't we, making speeches and everything, and you sort of think, well, actually, I've actually mispronounced that or something. But to actually mistake hostages for sausages shows a complete disconnection, doesn't it?
I think his tummy was probably rumbling at the time.
Yes, exactly. But so it's very, very unimpressive. That is the word that actually really applies to David Lammy, right? Our great Foreign Secretary, Rafe, who this week covered himself in glory, didn't he, at the UN?
Yes, David Mastermind Lammy, the man who thought Marie Antoinette discovered radium, and instead of Marie Curie, and then thought that the son of Henry VIII was Henry VII. Has now come back in fine form to essentially, you would have thought, given that he's got this new international platform, he would have risen to the occasion, and instead he seems to have sunk lower and lower in the virtue signalling. He's just, of course, become, the Foreign Office has just last week, become the only department to have flown a bisexual flag to celebrate Bisexual Awareness Week. I didn't realise it had come around so quickly this year. I haven't even got my own decorations out for it. But and so he seems to be really going for that Stonewall Award. And then he went to the United Nations, and he was there, to speak at the Security Council there with everyone staring down. Huge moment. And he grandstanded. And he wanted to speak about the Ukrainians and what's going on there. Perfectly decent topic to discuss. But he turned the entire thing into basically, look at me, a narcissistic moment, trying to compare the Ukrainians to his forebears being enslaved black slaves, so that they were brought over at the point of a gun. I'm sorry, your ancestors were not brought over at the point of a gun. Your ancestors were enslaved by other black people and then were sold in a slave market on the coast, actually. So, again, that was somehow omitted or whitewashed, if I can use that term, for that description. And essentially was accusing Russia of being imperialistic, which is perfectly decent, but then to try to bring it back into the cultural wars and say, well, I'm also a victim of imperialism, I just thought was so crass and so crude, and it was a point so badly made. And of course, the Russians are just sitting over from the table saying, well, you are exactly what we've told our people about the decline and decadence of the West. And of course, the Russians and the Chinese laugh at people like David Lammy because, of course, they're exposing the weakness and the lack of moral backbone in the West, and the complete sort of nihilistic navel gazing and focusing on the irrelevant issues. And I don't know how long he's going to last in office, because he keeps seeming to make pratfall after pratfall, but I hope he stays the course, because we're in for such a bleak, dreadful 5 years. We need a court jester to have some comic relief, and I think he can provide that.
But although actually he also made a mistake, didn't he, in some form of tweet when he talked about people being liberated. Don't know, I can't quite remember the details, but essentially he caused a bit of a diplomatic row, born of ignorance, again, born of ignorance. This is a man, Amy, who, apart from being on Mastermind, also thinking that, there was another one, 1972, the greatest gangster movie, directed by Francis Ford Coppola about the Italian mob, and he called it Sopranos. But I mean, sorry, but I think you don't have to be a great movie buff to see that, do you?
No, I mean, he said some outrageous comments. I mean, he's also called Trump kind of a Nazi, and he's smeared him as being part of the KKK. He just said utterly stupid things. And even when he first became Foreign Secretary, he did this speech at the start saying, as a black man and a descendant of slaves. That seems to be his go-to speech now whenever he's in any kind of situation. He doesn't have anything to say. He just says, speaking as a black man and as a descendant of slaves. I mean, in this current speech at the UN about the Russia-Ukraine war, he said, I know what imperialism is when I see it because I'm a black man and a descendant of slaves. And so he's making a kind of lived experience argument, but it's not even an experience that he's lived. He's saying my ancestors know about imperialism, therefore I know it when I see it. It's just like extreme stupidity. And I just think because he's utterly empty, I just don't think he's very clever. So he has to rely on all of this identity politics stuff, which will get attention and will mean that people won't be paying attention to the fact that he hasn't actually got anything interesting to say about Russia or Ukraine or any of these extremely complex issues because he's just not smart enough to be Foreign Secretary.
So who cares? Who cares what he thinks as Foreign Secretary or not?
Well, yeah, and the fact is, if as horrific as the enslavement of his ancestors was, he wouldn't be Foreign Secretary now had it not happened. So there's two sides to every story. But I don't think we've had a better poster child for box ticking, virtue signalling than David Lammy. This was a man who had a second-class degree from SOAS, one of the most appalling universities in Europe, and somehow magically got the scholarship to Harvard University. I presume this was done for some sort of affirmative action, reverse discrimination thing, because there's no other redeeming qualities to that appointment. And his whole entire career has been on the back, essentially, of filling in those application forms where you get to tick as many boxes as you want, it seems to me. And now he's been given an international platform where, of course, we can all see what an inept, completely unqualified person he is. But unfortunately, he is representing us on the global stage. And this reflects terribly upon all of us because we are now becoming a laughing joke as a result of it.
The other thing as well, which was, I remember, this is going back a few years, around about the time of Brexit, and he was on BBC with Stephen Wolfe, who was at that time immigration spokesman for UKIP, and he said quite openly, it was Remembrance Time. It was during Remembrance Time, and he said, of course, these hundreds of thousands of soldiers came and died for the European project, and Stephen sort of did a double take and said, wait a minute, you're talking about the Second World War. Yes, there wasn't even a European project to speak of. I mean, total lack of historical
he also
knowledge.
said, I think, yeah.
But also, on top of that, lack of self-awareness. I mean, you think, wait a minute, that sounds wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, they didn't die for the European project first, but also he said hundreds of thousands of died. He said millions died. No,
millions died.
It was a million who came over to fight. A million didn't die. The million was the size of the army that came over, the largest volunteer force. I mean, everything he says is a sort of an incompetent statement.
Apart from that, he's pretty good. Okay. It's a sort of short one this morning, actually, folks. And we are going to carry on a little bit for our members. So do become a member if you want to see the full unedited version. But anyway, in the meantime, thanks very, very much for watching. And we shall see you next week. Thanks. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.